moderators for today's roundtable. Courtney Aiken is from Apopka, Florida. She graduated with a bachelor's in sociology and a certificate in leadership from FSU, and she has a master's of science in higher education from right here at Florida International University. She is the assistant director of the Faculty and Student Research Training and Access Office, as well as the program coordinator for NBR's Bryan, a program sponsored by the National Institute of Health, dedicated to bringing increasing number of undergraduate and graduate students to underrepresented groups in biomedical and behavioral research. Moderating with Courtney today is Bryan Dewsbury, who is from the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. He has a master's in biology and environmental studies minor from Morehouse College, and a master's in biology from also right here at FIU, and he's pursuing a PhD in biology. I think it sounds like he's interested in biology. Also, currently he's the head TA for the TTR program, a specialized quantitative track for the fostering of students with greater critical thinking skills. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our two moderators. Thank you for being our first moderators of the semester.
Thank you. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. How are you guys doing? Good. Everyone has lunch? Yeah? All right. Well, like Eric said, my name is Courtney Aiken. I'm the Assistant Director of FSRTA, as well as the MBRS Rise Program Coordinator. And this is Bryan. He's going to help with, we're going to switch off with presenting. So, I want to take you all to our first slide. I want to get an activity going. Can we group up with about 3 or 4 people? And the activity, essentially, I want you all to look at the graph. According to the U.S. Department of Education, there are about 33% of black males who graduate from college, as well as 44% of black females who graduate from college. And we want you all to have a quick discussion, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, on what are the factors that drive such a large disparity in graduation rates between African American males and other students. Because as you can see, 33% is very small compared to the 57% rate that is shown on this graph here. So if you guys can take some time, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, group up with 3 to 4 people, and kind of get the conversation going and answering this question.
Don't make me choose groups.
We're not going to count off by numbers. Liz, where's your group?
Right, so
yes.
you say 3% represents retention, so the people who actually graduate, everybody else dropped out or failed or whatever.
It's up at 12:42.
You want to maybe go around and see what people are saying? Or stay up here?
I'll stay here. We've got a few minutes. And maybe just give them 2 to 3 minutes for the article. I would say even 2, because they're short article. You could ask, like, take about 3 or 4 hands as to what they came up with.
Are these people just sitting outside? They don't want to come in. What?
I guess you have to remember this thing is recording even when we even when we stop at 3.
So 4 years, 16.
How we doing?
Same for Spanish, starting in instruction as Spanish teachers. No, that's women. Then specifically history.
We doing all right?
He doesn't have a group over there. Getting quiet.
Yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah.
All right, let's get some responses. What do you all come up with? You can raise your hand. Not all at once. Richard?
Yeah, so we came up with the idea that maybe it's a psychological factor. Maybe they think that they can't, that they're maybe not, they don't have the same intellectual capacity as someone else.
Okay.
And it could also be that perhaps in the university or something, in high school, maybe an advisor or someone isn't the same. Like if you grew up in a neighborhood with one type of person, you're not as likely to open up to a different type of person, and you might feel threatened. So an advisor or something you might not feel as comfortable talking to them if they're not the same as you. So.
Alex?
Maybe they have other responsibilities, so it kind of takes away their time from school, and they'd rather focus on those other responsibilities. Like maybe at home, they needed to work to help raising.
Okay.
What about this group right here? Tiffany, Jen, anyone?
Sometimes they're not encouraged to meet people, or they don't have that role model to push themselves to do well. Because a lot of it sounds terrible, but a lot of the black fathers do end up in jail, and like, a lot of them just don't have that male role model to go to, like, to help them motivate themselves to succeed.
So lack of role model in general.
You have something?
It could be, we discussed our group economic issues. It could be expectations, like if a person is born into a mechanic's family, there's a good chance that the father will educate him that way, and the previous generation isn't college educated, that's made it by labor, could be. Also, that there's a continuing trend in less overall male involvement in universities. So all those together may be.
Okay.
Yeah, there were two more that I wanted to add for our group that I thought were interesting. There's a big push, especially in the sciences, on graduating women, and so it could be that the emphasis is on confidence in general. And then also, one person brought up that they may feel like the return on investment isn't there, and they go through college, and then they still have to compete with white males and so forth for jobs, and so even though they've gone through it, they may not have the advantage that they have.
Also, since this group is the least represented in people starting college, it makes it additionally difficult if you're the only person of your group in class, and you know that itself is a burden. I think that probably is very important.
All right, so all good responses. I want to spend the next couple of minutes, if it's okay. I'm not sure how many of you had a chance to read the New York Times article associated with today's roundtable, but there's a copy in this chair, so just spend like 1 or 2 minutes. It's a very short article. We're all on grade level, I assume. So just 2 minutes, and then we'll get into sort of the meat of today's discussion.
That's so great.
Definition.
Yeah. I'm going to take hands to see what they think stereotype threat is, and then give them a formal definition.
Don't call on disease, because she knows.
What was that?
The one next to the tree.
Okay.
Yeah, well, both of them, we had a reading group on it. It was with them, I had a reading group.
There are seats in the front if you guys want to come and sit. No? Okay.
You have class? Okay.
The babies. The babies. Is everyone almost wrapped up reading? They're still reading. All right, so from the article, everyone can kind of get an idea of what stereotype threat is. Would anyone like to volunteer and give the definition of what you see stereotype threat is from the Times article? It doesn't have to be the correct definition. Just what do you think stereotype threat is? Yeah. Richard.
Having some sort of, I guess, stereotype affect how you perform in life or
Okay. What about you, Eric?
That if you're the member of a group that has a stereotype against it, when you're interacting with someone from a majority group or a different group, you're assuming that they're thinking that about you, even though they may or may not be, but you feel that pressure and it makes you perform or act differently.
Okay. What about someone over here? Tiffany?
Like conforming to the social expectation of that stereotype.
Okay.
And for it, it's almost like being prejudiced. Because it's like people like Asian students are all A students. So in a way they say, oh, A. Way of stereotyping woman.
Okay. Well, according to Steele and Arison, the definition of stereotype threat is, it refers to being at risk of confirming, just like what Tiffany said, as well as Eric, confirming as self-characteristic a negative stereotype against one's group. So a lot of what you all said together definitely defines what stereotype threat is.
So I spent a number of years, I'm a PhD candidate, and I'll probably be graduating within a year. So I spent the last 4.5 years teaching undergrads. And one of the most powerful things in Claude Steele's work is when he talks about stereotype threat in a very subliminal thing. Meaning that it's present, but sometimes the people who are undergoing the threat don't realize that it has an effect on them. And as I began to read his work, most notably his book called Whistling with Barley, which we'll talk about in a few slides, a lot of the conversations that he talks about and the experiments that he uses to highlight the fact that stereotype threat actually does affect academic performance. I saw those conversations in conversations I had with my own students over the years, the entire time period. The idea that there are things outside of the classroom that either helps reinforce a stereotype about themselves that affect the way they perform, whether it's the pressure to raise the standard of living of a household, to raise a community standard of living, first immigrant pursuing a criminal degree, which degree you should pursue because of the stereotype of what wealth certain degrees have versus others. You know, the list goes on and on. So I decided to do a very simple experiment. Don't worry, I have too. We gave at the beginning of general biology, we gave our freshmen a simple test. It's called the Lawson test. And it's a test of scientific reasoning. It's a nationally accredited assessment tool, vetted in peer-reviewed journals, etc., etc. But the front page of the test, the instructions read, this test is an ability of your of you being able to reason things scientifically. So what I did is I gave one section, so I taught two sections. I gave one section the test with regular instructions, and I gave the second section the test, but I removed the instructions and I put, this is just a pre-test. Please answer as clearly as you can. So what you're looking at, the normal is where I didn't adjust anything. And the intervention is my adjustment. And the vertical axis represents the average score. Now, granted it's a small data set, I just did this one time, but it sort of speaks volumes to me that even that simple language change can release so much of that pressure of, can I really reason scientifically? I mean, we're talking about 17-year-olds, and you know, so you need to factor all that in the equation. Let me show you another set of data. We have, in the Quebec program, we have a series called Confluence. It's a seminar series where we invite a number of speakers to talk to our freshmen, well, talk to all of our students. And what we tell these speakers is, don't come and give us an hour seminar about the hard science and the really technical stuff. Talk about your lives, how you grew up, where you grew up, and the things in your life that help inspire you to choose the career you choose. And so the point of that is, if the students can kind of see themselves in the speaker, you know, see the struggles that the speakers had, see the things they went through, and sort of reflect on their own struggles, then they'll be inspired to kind of push past their own barriers, etc., etc. So in order to assess whether what we were doing was effective, we conducted a focus group. By we, I mean our evaluator. And in the focus group, it basically turned into a conversation about these sensitivities that the different students have of their status as a minority. What do they perceive being to minority? How do they feel when there are so many scholarships targeted for minorities? We want to encourage minorities to apply to the summer program because we need to increase minorities in the STEM fields. And some very interesting things came out in dialogue. So they talk about, so the first comment really sort of speaks to what happens from home. You know, how do you choose at 20 what you want to do for the rest of your life? Well, you know, there's certain voices telling you that you need to choose this because this guarantees $300,000 a year, which means certain things for a family and this household. They feel that there's, I think somebody mentioned having a mentor who kind of looks like you, and therefore it's easier to share certain things or maybe be a particular way or have a certain kind of conversation when you feel you can identify culturally with that mentor. But the last one, which I kind of want to speak to personally, is, and I guess I hear that one a lot, where there's a lot of support. They understand the basic idea that college is good, and college gets you a degree, and then a degree gets you another degree, etc., etc. But they can't very well go home and explain to them, you know, I worked in the lab today for 8 hours, and we ran a PCR to look at genetic differences between A and B, and we went to school. That's all we need to know. And I guess when I saw that story and I kind of read some of my notes of my interactions with my students over the years, you know, I thought of myself, which is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this stuff. You know, I spent the last, 15 years, 13 years in tertiary education. I left Trinidad at 19 years old. I'm the first in my family to pursue a terminal degree. And So as far as the minority story in America, I kind of come at this from both sides. So I went to historically black college, I went to all the minority summer camps with all the scholarships, then came to FIU and teach minorities, and I'm kind of seeing in my students a little bit of myself. And I realized that through the years, even though I probably wasn't able to admit this to a certain point, that a lot of what I've done, I've been very aware in a subliminal text that my parents look at me as like the family's brightest hope. So when they say things like, oh yeah, you know, Bryan's a smart one, like, you know, you kind of shrug it off and laugh it off. But it's a real thing. You know, I'm hearing it and they're saying it. I can pretend I'm not hearing it, but it's a real thing. So what Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson from NYU have done, which is just brilliant, is they were able to quantify this as a psychological phenomenon, but not only that, prove definitively that it actually affects how people perform in the classroom if they sort of carry this weight of expectation on their shoulder. So what we want to talk about today is a little bit, not just about how stereotype threat might exist within the particular demographic that's FIU, but also what we can talk about as far as interventions that can maybe relieve some of the pressures that some of our students face. So I'll let Courtney introduce the discussion.
All right, well, like Bryan mentioned, being the first in his family, I also was the first in my family to pursue getting my bachelor's as well as my master's. So that pressure has existed for a while. But unlike Bryan, I've not been here for 15 years. I'm born and raised a Florida girl, so I've been here all my life. But the pressure as far as being representative of your family is still there. As far as academics, especially work environment, being a young African-American woman in a position of authority, definitely get that pressure and fear of negative stereotypes upon myself from outside influences. For instance, today, well actually last night, speaking to my father about this presentation, the first thing he said to me was, "What are you going to wear?" Because he wants to make sure that I'm representing myself accordingly, that there will be no negative stereotypes upon me from the audience, from who's ever, you know, participating in the discussion. So unbeknownst to him, you know, that pressure was still there. I'm like, "Dad, I'm grown. I know what I'm going to wear. I know how to present myself," you know. But unfortunately, it's something that happens and you don't realize that it happens, but it does and it affects you. So I took extra time this morning picking out my clothes, just to let you know. So we're going to move on into our jump-off questions. This is going to be the basis, well, majority of our discussion today. Again, you can speak in groups, maybe 3 to 4. And the first question I want you guys to tackle is, what types of experience have you all had personally with stereotype threats? For faculty and staff, it could be with your students. For everyone, it could be within your work environment, whether you're doing research in a lab, if you work on campus, if you work off of campus. And also with students, what type of experience have you had with stereotype threats within your own class interaction with peers? Like you mentioned earlier, Richard, you may not be comfortable, you know, speaking with someone who's not like you, but I mean, in a classroom situation, you kind of have to have those interactions. So just discuss this first question amongst yourselves for maybe 5 minutes, and we'll bring it back, share, and then move on to the next question.
Do you have a pen?
I can't see.
Because if interesting things come up,
so funny when I look back. That would be so funny when I look back on this video and I send it to my dad. He's gonna be like, really? Yes, really. They should have worn my hair naturally all day.
It's over 3.
You sure? It's only 1 o'clock?
Yeah, because I feel a lot of the stuff will kind of come out in discussion, like when they volunteer their ideas and then people will jump off of something and piggyback on things they say.
Okay. They're still talking. I don't know how to cut people off. I don't know how to cut people off.
Want me to do it?
Yeah. You cut off and I ask questions.
All right, so let's hear some of the ideas that people had, or some of the comments that people had to the first question. Anyone? Anyone wants to speak for their group? I said we just want to hear any ideas that any of, as you discussed, some of the things that came out in the discussion.
Actually, in class interactions, when like another student asks me what major am I usually tell them, oh, I'm psychology and social work double major. And they're like, oh, that's okay because you're a woman. That's something that you should do. And I'm like, why? Because I'm a woman, I should be like, oh, because women are usually more, what's the word, nurturing and caring or something.
What percentage of the times that question is asked, or you give that response, do you get that response?
I would say maybe like 45% around there.
Wow. It's impressive. Ivan?
I go with your own students. I want to say about 95% of them are in the biology major because of their family influences. Both, let's say like the parents want them to be doctors, not necessarily that they want to be doctors, they've been told this is what you need to be, this is kind of where, what you need to bring into the family. It doesn't matter what you want, you're too young to know right now. Just go in it and you like it, and you'll succeed. Not necessarily true though.
Richard?
I think in vouch for you. My family's definitely like that. Yeah, but I actually do like medicine.
You like research too, right? All right, Richard.
Bryan?
I guess as like a non-traditional student and somewhat older than all of my peers in my class, kind of feel a bit of pressure to sort of be, mature and kind of, just be mature and not be too.
Sort of be more of the leader?
Yeah, not really more of a leader, just kind of not be too out there and take a step back and analyze and be calm and collected and not just go crazy and stuff like that.
So, I want to address the doctor comment really quickly because it was one of the first things I noticed when I began teaching. And, in Trinidad, we follow the British system. So pretty much from the time you're 16, you kind of choose your career. Like the 17 and 18, when you're 17 and 18, those last 2 years of high school, you're doing 3 subjects which are directly related to what you want to do for the rest of your life. So one of the things I actually loved about being American, I went to a liberal arts college, and I was taking classes in philosophy and art and stuff like that, but I wanted to do environmental studies. So it was surprising to me when I began teaching that students having matriculated in the American K-12 system still came in with it sort of hard and fast. 90% want to be doctors. My opinion on that was partly what you said, but also partly there's a lack of options that they know about. So I feel like a lot of freshmen come in thinking that biology major equals med school. And so what we try to do in Cubic at least is disabuse the notion that we're here to train doctors and try to go more the path of like, we're trying to make it as good as science as we can. What you do with that is on you. And here are the options of what you can do. This is what the salaries are. This is what the hiring percentages are, et cetera, et cetera. But specific to what you said and that pressure from home, what might you suggest might be a good intervention strategy to, what's the word I'm looking for? Relax the pressure, so to speak?
I think finding the right mentor for them, somebody who they can relate to, and they can see what the other person has done, and maybe they're not going into a doctor. Let's say they're being a biologist, researcher, that they can see kind of like what their career can lead to. Because like you said, a lot of them don't understand it, but there are plethora of different careers you can do with a biology degree. It doesn't have to go through medical school.
I think exposing them like right off the bat, like what I've been saying, exposing them right off the bat to different things like research and stuff. Because I know I was one of those that like I thought biology meant like medicine, but I was exposed to research and stuff, especially like your classes.
Advisor in our academic advising office, and I mentor a group of students from Northwestern Senior High and Miami Southern Senior High, usually very at-risk school students. And every time they tell me, I want to be rich, it drives me crazy. So I tell them all the time, you have to consider what you value as rich. There's different types of wealth. Like, I'm not super wealthy, but I have my home, I have my car, I pay my bills on time. So kind of giving them that idea of, you don't need to make $100,000 to be super rich. Like, I was complaining about money. I say, how much money is in your pocket right now? $5? Yes. You're doing all right, aren't you, today? So trying to have that conversation of, when you graduate, you don't have to be making 6 figures. You have to build up to something if that's what you want to achieve. But also the stress level. When I go home at the end of the day, nobody can contact me. So that balance of life and luck.
So I wonder about that because later today I'm actually giving a presentation to the MARC program about balancing work and family.
Rise.
Sorry, the RISE program. And one of the things we talk about is, America is a capitalist country, for the most part. And one of the basic tenets of capitalism is individualism. Is this idea of being all you can be, kind of maxing out, right? So I'm a grad student in biology, and it's assumed that you're going to follow a tenure track research career. And if you choose to teach, well, you could always teach. It's kind of second thing. In medicine, it's assumed you're going to be a cardiac surgeon. If you don't make it, well, you could be primary care or internal medicine. So I'm saying like there are forces out there that has already trained them that this level of earning equates success. And I wonder, by the time you get them, you say Northwestern, so that means they're high school. You're kind of battling against a force that was in the works for like 10, 12, 15, 16 years. And I just wonder how you do that. Like, how do you push back? And do you have like a metric of success in terms of how the kids respond to you?
Just kind of like, why do you want to be rich? What is it that you think?
I didn't say I want to be rich.
That's kind of what I was talking about.
I'm a grad student. No way.
Goal.
Gold shoes, really. That's why you want to be rich. So kind of having that conversation with them, like, how do you measure wealth, and then why do you want to do wealth? Or what is it that you want to do with life? Because right now you're saying you're planning the whole life. I said the whole life in one shot. Let's do it in 15 minutes. So instead of the whole life, let's do this semester, this next month. Let's break it down into something a little more manageable. And then the whole thing of being super rich. I told them, yeah, you hear your rap songs talking about balling and gold chains. But have you thought about, like, when you are going to be in your position, like investing? So sometime down the road, maybe you're going to retire? Or what do you want to do with the wealth?
Do you have conversations with that, like that, for people at FIU? I don't know what if your position. No, I'm sorry, like students at FIU.
Well, yeah, I also work with transfer students.
Okay.
We are a large transfer institution. And I have students, oftentimes, they make more money than me, and they don't even have an associate's. So they're like, I'm making lots of money. And I said, well, how many hours a week are you working? Like 60, 80. And they're like, I'm making money, but I'm not happy. And I said, okay, so the money's not making you happy. And that's kind of where
once you have the degree, what job do you want? I have a lot of times students tell me, what kind of job can I do with that degree? You gotta tell me what job you want, because otherwise I can't tell you what to do.
Like, I have a younger cousin who just finished high school. Like, she was up in New York first, and before she was always thinking about whatever I can do to like buy the coolest pair of shoes. And my mom like decided to bring her down here and make her finish her high school, because before she was just like, I'm just gonna get a job and then do whatever so I can just buy this, buy that, buy that. But she wasn't thinking ahead of like, do I want to really work at this, I don't know, say at this retail store for like forever, or do I want to like do something more than just, I don't know, buy the next fashion accessory. So it was hard to try to convince her that, you know, you have to finish at least your high school, so at least you'll have much more opportunities to do something different in your life if you didn't finish high school. So that was just my experience of how people were trying to just get money instead of what they want to do.
Right, so there's this kind of overwhelming pressure of to be wealthy and what wealthy means and what that means in connection to happiness and what that brings. And you know, that's like a whole separate discussion, but it does provide a context for the kind of pressure that they feel to go after certain careers because of what it can or cannot bring. So, specific to FIU, I mean, I'm not sure if there are any instructors or professors in the audience. I know I'll hear it from you afterwards. And I know we've talked about this separately. And at least I feel, and I know Courtney feels, we've sort of seen the effects of stereotype threat demonstrated both in the behavior of the students, their choices, and more importantly in the work that they do in the classroom. We're trying to sort of move to a point where we could have intervention strategies, like real tangible things that, based on literature, based on what we've seen happen at other institutions, can start to get people having the discussion. One of the more interesting experiments that Dr. Steele did was he actually asked people, I think they asked them if this is something they feel they experience, and the answer was no. And then they did an experiment and showed to them that they did. And I can't remember the actual detail. But the point here is that it's very subliminal. So even people who feel that they're sort of released from this stuff and can think on their own and not affected by it, like myself, could actually be having these effects manifested in their daily lives. So among the interventions that they talk about is basically talking about it, kind of like what we're doing right now. Just having a conversation to sort of get in touch with what might actually be happening. So the question I have for the audience is, where besides Tuesday lunchtime roundtable do you think that conversation can and should take place?
More directly with students, you mean?
Yeah, so with
faculty members and administrators.
So right. So those are two separate conversations that will have to take place, and so A and B.
With students, I think it's at the time of orientation. I think then is when we need to say, you're here, you made it, so you're obviously not part of the statistic. You should be able to accomplish and perform to par with all your peers, no matter what race, no matter what ethnicity, what female, male. You're already here. Your SATs are here. You were accepted because of your educational background and your capabilities, not because of all these other factors that you feel identified with. I think you're here to learn and you're here to succeed, so we're here to help you succeed. And I think that's when it needs to be established. At orientation, we need to say, we are an international university, and accepting students from different backgrounds and wanting them to be successful. So I think that message from the moment they walk in here is what needs to be shared to them, to the students.
I think that's a great idea, but you have to think that orientation is on Division of Student Affairs side. What happens when a student gets in the classroom with the professor on academic affairs side? How does that translate? How do we have both of that message for both parties, because there is a divide whether or not you see it or not. Academic affairs side is very different from division of student affairs. Tiffany?
In the SLS courses that we teach, we have a whole chapter on stereotype and
Great.
At times I have used stereotypical characteristics myself for my advantage. Because sometimes you'll come into a situation, and although you are who you made yourself, who you feel you are, the situation doesn't want that. They want something else. So as part of success, I've given them what they wanted. Because I need to get what I need. So if I need this and you want to see that,
can you be more specific?
Well, let's say, like, I'll be with some people, I'm Hispanic, right? But I don't know anything about that. Other than I speak it, food, I know the history, a lot of history. So if I come into a place, and I was in this 51 years in this country, I think in English, etc. And I'll come in, and they go, Domingo, and they go, I'm Hispanic. So if I start talking like everything's like one, sometimes I get hesitant from people. Then I'll come back at it and I'll act Hispanic in quotes, and everything's okay. Because this is what they wanted to see. It's a phenomenon. I'm not trying to explain it. I'm just looking to, if it's a 12-ounce hammer is going to solve the problem, I'm not going to go to a 1-pound hammer. I'm looking to get what I want out of it.
Right.
What if it's just social interaction, and they want me to be Hispanic? Okay, fine. Okay. I mean, it's just one of the things that I do.
Right.
So it's stereotypical behaviors of sometimes we've taken them willingly. A lot of people do that.
Right.
Your hand in the back. Okay. Oh.
Sorry. I always feel like in classrooms when you're put into groups, it kind of helps ease the tension a little, although it's always awkward at first, especially if you're doing it on the first day. You always get to work with different people that you get to find out more about them. And the only way that happens if you're forced to do it. Personally, most of us, I'm sure, would probably not want to just be like, okay, I'm going to be in a group with you, you, and you. And when you're actually forced to be in a group, you just are forced to meet new people, and it actually kind of eases you up, and you actually learn like, oh, we actually have a lot in common. Maybe we're 20 years apart or something, but we actually share the like science or something like that. And icebreakers, they're awkward at first also, but like you actually do get to learn a lot. Like I went to a CSO meeting and went to do this icebreaker where you play rock, paper, scissors, and if you lose, you become someone's cheerleader. So in the end, you have two people going against each other with half the people on one side and half on the other, and you actually have like a really fun time cheering for someone you don't even know. And you learn their name because I remember I'm yelling, Cindy, Cindy, and
That's cool. That's cool.
So your advocation is sort of a top-down approach. So, at the administrative level, we need to design programs that kind of force you all to be in a situation where you have to recognize the difference and adapt to it.
You have to be forced to be uncomfortable, right. But eventually you become more socially grounded. You have more social skills. We wouldn't regularly.
Right. I particularly like the idea of the SLS class, especially since, I like the concept of the SLS class in general. But I like the idea of using it as a medium to get that discussion going, because one of the things that has been happening in the last 6 to 10 years is the recognition that a lot of the quality in class learning is being severely affected by out of the classroom issues over which the in-class instructor has very little control. And the less we pay attention to those out of the classroom issues, such as this, the more we kind of semester after semester scratch our heads wondering why we're not increasing our graduation rates or grade point average, et cetera, et cetera. So, we talked a little bit about, getting students sort of aware of it and getting situations where they can discuss it. What about the real albatross? What about faculty? And I say this with all respect, love my colleagues, but, my little toe that I've dipped into the water of teaching classes, I can tell that, the faculty have a lot of responsibility. They're a highly stressed bunch. They there are some who are accustomed to a very conventional approach to the classroom and may not necessarily be amenable to kind of a touchy-feely, let's talk about this kind of approach. How do you get faculty sort of aware of it, engaged in the idea, and engaged in solutions to address it?
Well, I think like last semester with the book club with cats. I mean, that's a start, right? And if you get, that can be a sort of a seed and get more and more people that are aware. And it's not just about whether touchy-feely or not. You also have to have a deeper understanding to know how to move things in the right direction and know what you're doing. Otherwise, it's not going to do any good. So I think it's more than just awareness, but also sort of some skill teaching that needs to be done as well.
Right, so the structure, a structured approach.
I'm curious as to what we can do with testing, because the testing interventions, like the instructions, seem kind of like a relatively feasible. I mean, I think asking instructors to change the prompt in that way. So I'm curious as to, since there are a lot of students in the room, the extent to which you think testing might be an issue at FIU specifically. If whether you feel test anxiety or you know that your friends, when they're taking high-stakes tests, as college tests tend to be, midterms, finals, that testing situation is one where that might have a very significant consequence on graduation rates, right? So your testing affects your GPA. GPA is a strong predictor of graduation. So I think the emphasis on testing and the way that we, design the test instruments might be a useful place.
Any students want to comment on that? Assuming you've taken tests.
No.
Alex?
I've always thought about that, where like you have certain classes like a C is passing, like organic chemistry or organic chemistry too. I always feel like that's a big, like it's a broad area where should you be getting a C to just pass? Like, I mean, I got a C personally, and I was happy for that, but it's like, just the happiness of passing that class with such a low grade, it's kind of sad. I mean, I'm happy I passed, but at the same time, is that acceptable where most of the class gets a C and everyone's kind of like at the last week, everyone's freaking out like, oh my God, I need to pass this. If I don't pass, I'm going to have to retake it. And then you have the whole pressure of applying to medical school, how they're going to look at that and they're going to be like, wow, you got this grade. But to yourself, be like, I passed, I made it an achievement,
Right.
It's, you're not really shooting yourself in the foot, but it's also,
I know a lot of people who think of it as like the first thing, as soon as they get the syllabus, they look and say, okay, I at least need this much to pass. So they like slack off like some here and there, but we can build it up later. I'll build it up later. So when it comes to the final day, they're like, oh, I have to get like a 95 to hit this goal.
Right.
And some people, like I have a friend who she didn't do the homework for a calculus class. She got iffy on some of the earlier tests, but she ended up on the final getting like in the 90s and it passed the class. And her teacher was like, I don't know how it's possible that you did that. But it just shows that, I mean, you can do it, but some people just go to the bare minimum to just keep going.
I think it just depends on the difficulty of the class you take. I mean, Orbital Chem versus, some other classes, well, passing the C to me means two completely different things. I mean, I haven't taken it, but from what I heard is like, that's one of the most difficult classes that people can take, as opposed to like, some other class, maybe a sociology class or an easier science class. Like, to me, that's two different things because they're two different difficulty levels. So like, if it's just bare passing in that class, it might not be, bare passing or mechanics. Some people really have to work for that.
Right.
Like how much of a study.
But kind of like what he said as well, is not just the grade in the class, but it's the pressure of knowing that the med schools are looking at it. It's a strong predictor of whether you'd actually get out of biology major, etc. So it's beyond the grade, it's the whole thing that comes with it. And then, oh, I may not be a doctor if I get a C,
When I was a student, at least, answering your question, ECs was, I think I took a class a little lighter when I saw there were 4 tests and some quizzes here and there than as opposed to 2 tests that determined, you know, whether I had captured all of the information shared to me. So I think the answer to your question is I felt more pressure in classical English test as a midterm and a final as opposed to 4 tests and a few quizzes and maybe some homework. I think I felt like I could perform better with, you know, when it's broken down that way.
Briefly, before we take any more hands, I want to bring up the pressures of classes even before you get in them. Even myself coming to FIU as a master's student, I had heard, like you said, that classes are going to be difficult and that people failed college algebra, for example. How many of you all have experienced that where even before you've gotten into class, that pressure of the whole, like the class is just going to be horrible and it affected, you know, your your experience with the class and just how you, you know, performed and, you know?
I've never taken calculus before, so like when I came to the class, I was like, oh my god, this is gonna be hard. And then like it kind of like freaks you out when you hear like a bunch of other students like this class is hard. Like for example, I'm an accounting major and I had to take like the entrance exam in March, and like I go to like the review class. So it's like a bunch of other people who took it like 2 times and you only have 3 chances. So like they're freaking out and it's like they're freaking me out. Because they did it like twice already and they failed. And it's like it's so much pressure because they're like this class is not gonna help. Like you only have like it's once a week. The exam is hard, the passing mark is like 20 something. And I'm like, oh my god, like now I'm like scared because it's like I have to take it in March. It's like I have like a bunch of the classes juggling and I still have to like prepare for this exam. And like the School of Accounting makes it so difficult because it's like, as like I stated earlier, like those people who like they can't take any more classes. If they don't pass the 3rd time, that's it. They have to change their major from accounting. So it's like knowing that you only have like 3 chances, it's like it's pressure.
That sort of reminds me of like when my mom first came, graduated nursing from Jamaica, and she went up to New York, and everybody was telling her that, oh, I don't know what the test is called, but to be certified to be a nurse in America, like everyone, yeah, they were like, oh, it's so difficult and such and such. And my mom was like, oh, so did these people pass it? That means I can do it too. So sometimes personality alone will just like push you along to do stuff, but I guess a lot of people will get affected by like these things. Everybody say, oh my god, oh my god.
I think, has anyone heard of ratemyprofessor.com? So when you go and you look at who your professor is going to be and you read comments, oh, laid back, just attend lecture, you should be fine, read your notes once in a while, you'll be good, as opposed to saying, terrible professor, tests are super hard, you have to study all the time, no matter what you do, you'll still get a C or less, or something like that. Then that adds more pressure. So even before you get into the classroom, you're like, holy moly, I really need to strap down for this one, because it's going to be really hard. So I think we do that to ourselves, because we're the ones going to rate my professor to see. Instead of having an open mind before we go to class, we have this thing that we need to know ahead of time how the class is going to be, how the professor is going to be, how hard the material is going to be. So I think that kind of shoots us in the foot too. So it's maybe knowing less is better than going in there. So
the saying goes, knowledge is a curse sometimes. So we want to wrap up real quick by just showing you some resources. Thanks for a great discussion, by the way. There are many different places you can go to read about Stereotype Threat. Definitely want to read Dr. Steele's and Dr. Joshua Aronson's original work. Whistling the Valley is basically a summary of the phenomenon that Courtney is modeling right now. And he goes through the last decade of research they've done to demonstrate not just that a threat exists, but it actually affects performance. FYI, it's not just African Americans in college. It's white men running sprint races. It's white men in a class of math with just Asians. It's women in math. You know, it's women in science, correct. So it's a number of different permutations of the same issue, but wherever that stereotype can be perceived to affect you, it can have an effect. The second book, some of my best friends are black. It's a very, very interesting story. It's nonfiction. The author talks about integration in America from the point of view is his growing up days in Alabama, then to Kansas City, and then New York City. It might be probably one of the more honest discussions on integration, and I think it's relevant to today's discussion because he talks about why the threat exists, without actually using the words, but he talks about what the roots of the threat are, the fears of integration, the fears of perception, where those perceptions came from and the history of it. And the third book is basically the K-12 version of Whistling Vivaldi. So Paul Toft talks about issues with children's success basically from kindergarten to high school and into college. An excellently written book and addresses some of the exact same themes.
And the last reference is a website, reducingstereotypethreat.org. If you can click on it. If you enjoyed this discussion and want to learn a little bit more and share it with your friends, with your peers, with your colleagues, this website has a lot of research on stereotype threat, issues, and controversy that's found in the literature. It definitely touches upon the negative consequences that are found in academic settings. It doesn't work. Well, once we get the link up, you'll see that it defines what stereotype threat is. It talks about its consequences, who's vulnerable to stereotype threat, what type of situations lead to stereotype threat, what can be done to reduce. So you can just continue to have this conversation going on. Definitely click on the site when you can, share it with everyone, tweet it, put it on Facebook. Just get the conversation going, get the comments going, and just, you know, try to reduce it eventually. Oh, there it is. So, feel free. Definitely want to leave you all with that take home. Share it, like I said, keep the conversation going with everyone.
All right, thanks everybody for coming out.
Thank you.